Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Today's movie was a request from Jordan. Jordan, thank you so much for requesting The Ring. This is the 2002, I believe, American remake of the Japanese film Ringu, although it's actually been in many different forms. Besides the Japanese film that came out in 1998 or 1999, there have been countless other Japanese versions. I actually have a bit of a history with this movie, Craig, because I was living in Japan in 2001, and people were still talking about this movie, and when I was in the video store looking for things to rent, yes, we did have a VHS player back then. The Ring was there, along with like The Ring Part 2, something called Rasen, Ring Zero. They had made a lot of different sequels and prequels, and also like a television miniseries type version of it, where a girl wanders around topless most of the time. It's it's Japan, and they milked this for all it was worth. It was a huge hit all around Asia, and it was based on a novel by an actor, actually, named Koji Suzuki. So I imagine Mr. Koji Suzuki is sitting real pretty right now.
Right.
With all the money he's getting from this, because then we also had multiple sequels, I think, to this one in the United States as well. Am I right?
Well, I think there was The Ring 2, and then we have in theaters right now Rings, which is a return to the franchise. I think it's just those two here in the States.
Okay. Wasn't there one, Sadako versus the person from The Grudge?
Yeah, I think that was in Japan, but that is recent too. I mean, that's just been within the last few months that's come out as well.
Okay, so here they are about it's been almost 20 years. Not so much from the U.S. side. I guess it's only been about 13 years since we've last seen a Ring movie. And then they're rebooting it. It's so weird. It's kind of a thin story in a way. It's hard to imagine rebooting it, especially because the old one deals so much with old technology, videotapes and whatnot. It would be interesting to see how they've updated it. Have you seen the new one that's in the theaters?
I haven't seen the new one. I've read about it a little bit, and I think that is kind of what they were going for, was trying to expand it into new technology. I read a review of it today, and the review was generally positive, and they felt like it did go in some new directions. This particular reviewer felt like it took them a little bit too long to get there, that they were relying a little bit too much kind of on just the original stuff. But this reviewer said that there is a good payoff in the end that does utilize some new things and kind of sets it up for potential sequels to move forward in different directions. So I don't know. I doubt very much that we've seen the end of it. I mean, it's been a really successful franchise. This movie did very, very well in theaters. They opened it early in October to a limited release, and they wanted just to kind of see how it was going to do. In that limited release, it did very well, and then so they expanded it, moving in closer to Halloween, and it ended up at the time being the most successful horror remake of all time. I don't know if it still holds that title, but it did very well, and of course they moved forward with a sequel immediately. The sequel, I think, also performed very well. It wasn't received very well critically, but the franchise has been a big success.
Have you seen the sequel?
I have, but you know what? I don't remember anything about it. I read reviews and things of it too, preparing for this, and most of the fan reviews and things that I read were generally pretty negative. It didn't satisfy the public very well as a follow-up. I mean, they ate it up. They paid their money to go see it, but I think it left people disappointed, which is probably why we're only now getting a return to it.
I'd be curious to know if you saw the Japanese original either, or at least the big theatrical one that everyone kind of points to. Ringu.
Yeah, no, I haven't, and I really know very little about it. Again, in prepping for this, I was reading different things, and kind of the general consensus that I saw was that the remake was actually somewhat of an improvement. I guess that this film, The Ring, follows the plot and most of the plot details from the original pretty closely, but maybe adds in a few elements that make this even better. Now, of course, I'm reading American reviews. If I were reading Japanese reviews, it might be a different story, but that's kind of what I've heard. Have you seen the original?
Yeah, I have. That would be back in 2001. I actually got a friend of mine and then one of my high school students over to help translate for us. So we just popped in the videotape, and she sat there between us and was kind of telling us what we needed to know as it was going on. My whole assessment of the original was that it was creepy and then boring for a long time, and then creepy again, with a killer ending. And honestly, that's how this movie could have turned out. But I think because they added in a lot of smaller elements, you're right, it does follow the plot pretty closely, but there are elements of that plot and lots of little ties into the video that they kind of stick in, a lot more flashback that they stick in, and a lot more little scares kind of along the way, that I think this one is a little bit superior in that, yeah. And the ending of the original was one of the scariest things I'd seen in a long time up until that point. We've since superseded that, but I think the ending of this film is also very effective. And I thought, man, they have quite a baseline standard to hold up to here when they were doing the American remake of getting an ending that's as creepy and as scary as the Japanese one, which was done in a pretty low-rent way, but very effective. But they sure did. I mean, the ending of this one, I know we're going to get to it, is great.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about how the original maybe got a little bit boring. I was actually a little bit worried going into this. I think because I did see it when it came out, because there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of marketing for the movie, and they kind of tried to keep it shrouded in mystery. There was a lot of showing elements of the cursed tape, which we'll get to here in a second, but not really providing a lot of context. And so it was really just a lot of spooky imagery. And then, of course, as it got closer, as it opened, and they were continuing to advertise, they were showing more parts of the movie. And I remember going in then being very excited about it, but feeling a little bit disappointed in the end, because I felt like maybe in the marketing they had given a little bit too much away. I felt like maybe I had seen a little bit too much of the good stuff. And so there wasn't as much the element of surprise as I would have liked. Now, the ending I did enjoy. And so in going back to this to talk about it tonight, I looked at the runtime of an hour and 55 minutes, and I thought, oh, man, that can be really long for a horror movie. But I didn't think that it was too long. I thought that the pacing was actually really very strong. I mean, it moves. There may be some lulls where there's a lot of detective work going on in this movie.
Yes.
And sometimes, we would get some pretty long sequences of detective work, but in those sequences, we were constantly being fed information. We were constantly getting new information. It's not like it was boring. So I didn't think it was too long. I thought the pacing was actually one of the strengths of the movie, and I think the storytelling is really good here. As I was watching it this time around, I think that I realized that it's really a pretty traditional ghost story, except for the introduction of the cursed tape element, which we hadn't really seen anything quite like that. I mean, we've seen cursed objects and cursed houses and those types of things, but the use of the technology and the spirit using the technology as a medium to communicate with and eventually kind of enter into the real world, that was unique. Beyond that, it's a fairly standard ghost story where you've got kind of a vengeful spirit, and those who are affected by it kind of have to figure out the backstory of what's going on in order to try to figure out how they can rectify whatever needs to be rectified and move forward. But that being said, it didn't feel stale. It didn't feel like something that I had seen before. I thought that it was a fresh twist on a fairly conventional story, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I completely agree. It does have its roots in urban legend, and that's kind of interesting. Like you said, we've seen the cursed object thing before, but I think what makes this creepy is the same sort of thing that makes... we're even seeing It Follows, for example, right now, where with a cursed object, you have the cursed object, and it affects you in some way. Generally speaking, if you get rid of the cursed object or pass it along to somebody else, then you're home free. Whereas in this case, the idea that you could stumble upon a videotape and watch it, and now you're doomed.
Right.
No no real fault or knowledge of your own. It's not like the videotape itself said don't watch. It's really a pretty freaky kind of idea. Much like I thought It Follows, the movie, had a really good concept, at least, where you can have sex with someone and then boom, you're doomed. At least in that case, there was a way to kind of pass it on to somebody else, but then it could always come back to you. So in this case, you're just going to die, if you watch this tape. And that's what these two girls at the beginning of this movie begin talking about. And I actually thought it was a great intro too, because it's just, we just jump right into that story. We have Becca and Katie, who are having some kind of sleepover. It looks at Katie's house. They're like high school age girls, and they're just chatting as they're watching TV, which is also a cool thing. And you get that green glow of the TV on their face as they're talking. Becca just starts talking about this story that she'd heard about a videotape.
You start to play it, and it's like somebody's nightmare. Then suddenly, this woman comes on, smiling at you, right? Seeing you through the screen. And as soon as it's over, your phone rings. Someone knows you've watched it. And what they say is, you will die in 7 days. And exactly 7 days later...
Who told you that?
Somebody from Rivera.
Who told you?
What's your problem?
I've watched it.
It's a story, Katie.
No, me and Josh, we saw it last weekend.
And it's really neat the way this scene plays out, because at first you're like, oh, come on. It's kind of a silly deal that she's telling her the story. She happened to watch the tape. But then Katie tries to play it off. She kind of like she's joking and falls into her arms. Then Becca thinks she's joking until the phone rings. And then there's a look on Katie's face that totally betrays. And Becca's like, oh, my gosh, that actually happened. And Katie never really says, yes, it did. It was a nice, neat way of doing that kind of an introduction, jumping right into the story. And it just rode the line of not being too goofy.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And especially, in the first time seeing the movie, I mean, this scene, there are a couple of iconic scenes in this movie. And this is one of them. I mean, this scene has been spoofed in several movies that I've seen. I had actually forgotten that it was from this movie. I remembered all the spoofs, but I had forgotten that it came from this movie. And it is. And there's, it's nice suspense. The phone rings, and they had talked about how that was kind of one of the elements of what happens. And so, they go to answer the phone, and I think Becca actually answers the phone, and she just sits there quietly. We can't hear who's on the other side, and she just kind of ominously hands it to Katie. And then Katie says, oh, hi, Mom. And it's just her mom. But then sort of kind of weird things start happening around the house, like doors are opening, the TV's coming on by itself, and Katie is obviously scared. When she goes back upstairs, she's calling for Becca, and Becca's not responding. She goes back upstairs, and she sees water on the floor, and she opens the door to her bedroom, and I think we maybe hear her scream, but it just cuts to like some really, really quick flashes, almost subliminal flashes. We can't see what's going on. And then it just cuts away, and we cut to some new characters. We're in a school, and we see a little boy. His name is Aiden. He's played by a child actor named David Dorfman, who I recognized. He's a really creepy looking kid, just in general. I had to look him up. The thing that I recognized him from, he was in the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He had a small role in that, creepy in that too. But he's sitting there in his classroom, and his teacher's at the front of the desk, and it's just him. And we hear a woman walking down the hall, and it turns out to be Rachel, played by Naomi Watts, who I think this was one of her big breaks. I think she had done some things before this, but this was one of her first big films. I know that they originally approached Jennifer Connelly with this, and she turned it down. Then they went to Jennifer Love Hewitt and Gwyneth Paltrow and Kate Beckinsale, and they all turned it down. And eventually it went to Naomi Watts, and this was kind of her breakout role. She's coming to pick up Aiden from school, and she's late. And the teacher is concerned about Aiden, because Aiden has recently lost his cousin, who we soon find out is Katie, the girl from the opening scene, and he doesn't seem to be taking it well. He's drawing pictures of Katie buried in the ground. And Rachel, she kind of comes across as kind of defensive and standoffish. She doesn't come across as particularly likable, especially in this first scene. But she tells the teacher, of course, he lost his cousin, who he usually spent 2 or 3 days with. It was a week. It was his best friend. And it's only been 3 days. And the teacher says, so you're saying that she died 3 days ago? And Rachel says, yeah. And the teacher says, well, he drew these last week. So we already know something's going on. And when Rachel takes Aiden home, as she's tucking him in, they're talking about things, and she says, would you like me to read a story? And he says, no, I'm kind of tired. And then as she's walking away, he says, we don't have enough time. And she says, I know, I work a lot. We don't have time together. And I'm going to try to work on that. And he says, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, we don't have enough time to live. And she says, you've got plenty of time to live. And he says, well, do you know when I'm going to die? And she says, no, we don't know when we're going to die. And he says, well, Katie did. She told me. She knew something was going to happen. So already we're putting together that there's the story behind this tape, this urban legend that Becca was talking about. It appears that there's something to it. And when Rachel and Aiden attend the funeral, Rachel's sister, who is Katie's mother, is distraught, and she asks of Rachel, she says, I just can't imagine what could have happened. A teenager's heart does not just stop. I've talked to all these doctors. Nobody can explain what happened, and I just don't know how I'm going to find out. And Rachel says, something comforting. But the sister says to her, but you can find out, right? Your job is to ask questions. Rachel is a reporter. I guess her sister kind of tasks Rachel with investigating what's going on, and really that's what happens. I mean, right away, even at the funeral, Rachel does start asking questions, and right away she starts getting leads.
Yeah, that she goes outside where there's some girls and a guy talking, and they're teenagers, and they're chatting about Katie and the death, and she learns that Katie had a boyfriend, Josh, who also died that very night. And at the same time, apparently at 10 o'clock, she finds out later, and so and that was apparently a suicide. We through her investigation, she finds that he jumped off of a really, really high ledge of a building. Again, that was at 10 o'clock. And then, later on, we have detective scenes where she's going through, and she discovers that the other kids that they were with at the time when they watched this tape are also died in a car accident, sure enough, the same time at 10 o'clock. So,
Right.
What they've revealed is that Katie and these kids, along with her boyfriend Josh, were at a cabin, and apparently their mother didn't know about it.
Right.
Didn't even know about the boyfriend,
Right.
too. So that's how all this kind of was under wraps, and gives her some things to find out.
What I found to be a little bit on the cheesy side was how easily all these pieces fall into place.
Yeah.
I mean, she never really runs into any kind of roadblock. There's at one point in the movie where they kind of end up back where they'd started. And in fact, she even says, I'm back where I started. I don't know where to go from here. But then there's another device that very quickly leads them right onto the next path. That was the only thing. We talk about realism in movies all the time. Would these things fall into place so easily? Surely not. But for storytelling's sake, I'm glad that they do, because it keeps the pace moving, and it keeps it from lagging. And I appreciate that. One of the things, I think that after she talks to the teenagers, she goes up to get Aiden, who is in Katie's room, and she's kind of snooping through Katie's stuff a little bit, and I feel like she finds a tag. Our younger listeners probably won't even know what this is either, but when we used to have film in cameras and we used to take that film to be developed, they would give you a tag, like a dry cleaner slip, that you would turn back in to collect your pictures. And so she finds one of those in Katie's room, and she goes and gets the photographs, and it's very typical teenage stuff. It's of them, she sees the sign of the Shelter Mountain Inn that they're going to, and then it's a sequence of them, photographs of them walking into the cabin, and there's even a picture of them sitting in front of the TV, and then after the picture with the TV in it, there's distortion in all of their faces. It's just their faces, but their faces are distorted. And she finds that odd. And so that's what leads her, I think, to go to check out the Shelter Mountain Inn. Again, she just the clues just keep piling up.
Yeah, they do. She goes to this inn. There's an innkeeper there, a young guy who just nonchalantly says, yeah, I recognize these people. Yes, they were here. There were some complaints about them. They were a little rowdy, blah, 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 blah. But she turns around and sees that there is a shelf. And again, very conveniently, she sees a shelf of VHS tapes.
Reception's never good here. That's why we bought tape players for videos.
Quite a selection.
Mostly they're hand-me-downs left by other guests.
And looking at this tape rack, she can instantly spot and just intuit which tape is the one, because it's the only one not in a tape sleeve.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's all kind of hokey. I mean,
it is hokey. It's funny though, because that's a real thing. My dad used to take me fishing in Minnesota every summer up until I think I was like a freshman in college. We went every summer, and this was not uncommon at all for there not to be any kind of satellite or cable or anything. There would just be one rinky old TV with the VHS, and you could go to the office and borrow movies to watch. So that was I smiled at that because it was kind of nostalgic for me. And I imagine that some, especially contemporary viewers today, would think, "What? That would never happen." No, folks, that was a real thing.
Oh yeah, it totally was. No, I remember it too. In fact, you even in like a normal, like a Holiday Inn or a place like that, sometimes instead of the movies you can rent through the television, you would have to go downstairs and like rent a tape and bring it back up. It was
right.
It was totally a thing. But what's hokey about it is that, oh, here's the tape. It's right there on the shelf. It's so obvious, but it's not obvious. But she just knows that this is the one because it's the one that's not in the sleeve and it's unmarked. And so she grabs it and she takes it back to the room and she watches the tape. And the tape itself is pretty cool. And this is where they took some liberties a little bit with the Japanese version, although in spirit it's very similar. She sees a number of images on the tape. There's a tall ladder, and the tall ladder falling, and a close-up on what looks to be an eye, but it's clearly like an animal eye or something. There's an image of a tree. There's water lapping across the ground. There's something dead that seems to have washed up on a beach, and there's something in the distance there. There's a fly buzzing around at one point that looks like it got on the camera as it was recording. There's a woman who you can see through a mirror on the wall who seems to be looking at the person in the camera. The mirror moves to the other side of the wall, and you can see like what looks like a girl with her back to the camera. And just all of these images flash by it. And as Noah, her boyfriend, who we'll meet later, mentions it, it's like a cheap student art film.
Right.
That actually reminded me,
a Nine Inch Nails music video or something.
Ah, there you go. Yeah. It actually reminded me of Un Chien de Andalou. It's and I might not even be saying that right, but that's a Salvador Dali film. Have you heard of this movie or seen it?
No, I haven't, but I know I'm familiar with Dali's work. It's all very surreal, and the video, the images are very surreal, so that makes sense.
Oh, it is, and even in Dali's film, what it's probably most famous for is an image of an eye getting stabbed, basically. And that, where you kind of just flick that creepy thing in there. And again, it also kind of reminds you even of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory when they're going through the tunnel. And there's that video that's playing behind them, and it just has all these random creepy things and things that might be even normal, but because in the context and the way that they're flashed up so quickly at you, it just assaults your senses. It's very convincing as a kind of tape that might have some mystical, magical power about it, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
And what really separates this movie from the Japanese one is that all of these images on the tape are very deliberate in that later on in the film, as the investigation progresses, one of the things that keeps it interesting, and this is what the Japanese film kind of lacked, which is why it was super boring during the investigation part, is that All of the bits and elements in the tape, almost all of them get referenced at some point. Like, she will see the tree. She will see the ladder.
Yeah, and from there, this is I didn't remember this. It starts counting down the days. We move away from the cabin and we get a title card that says Thursday, day 1. Noah is headed off to school and he runs into this guy in the street and they just kind of pause and look at each other, which I thought was kind of odd. I couldn't remember what was going on there.
Oh, so strange.
Noah's played by an actor named Martin Henderson. He's done a lot of TV. He was in Grey's Anatomy.
It was Aiden, actually, who was walking down the street and saw this guy who was Noah. You're right, it's a weird scene. They stare at each other and then they walk by and you think that this is a stranger that he's seeing. It's strange. In fact, even still, it's strange. Apparently, Rachel has called him. And so he is on his way to Rachel's apartment. And he shows up there and she tells him the story of the tape. And later on, we intuit. And what's really nice is at the times they really spoon-feed you things, and other times they withhold information and give it to you in a more natural way. And this is one of those circumstances where it's slowly we learn that, oh, they have a previous relationship. And then much later, we learn Aiden is actually their son. But at the time, we only know that he is maybe a photographer friend. And so she asks him for advice about this tape because he knows photography. She wants to know where it came from. And he wants to watch the tape. And she's like, I don't think that's such a great idea. And she's like, people died from this. And he's like, look, Rachel, nobody died from watching a videotape. And so
and the evidence that she's citing is that now that she's watched it, she has taken a bunch of pictures of herself, and she has him take a picture of her, and I guess it makes us sound like a film camera, but I guess it's a digital camera because he can see it right away, and her face is distorted in the same way that there's the kids was in those photographs. And so she is actually concerned that something is going on here. And so when he wants to watch the tape, she doesn't want to let him. But like you said, he's so skeptical, she finally just relents and lets him watch it. And we get to see, him watching it. And after he does watch it, the phone rings, but they just don't answer it.
I got to say, I mean, it's a little silly that this photographer would take some pictures of her, see that her face is distorted, and not find that more interesting. Like, wouldn't he then turn it around and take some pictures of himself or take some pictures of some other things? He doesn't do a very good job in his skepticism of reassuring her, oh, it's just a problem with the camera or something like that. I mean, she did call him over to help him because he has expertise in these matters. And he's just like,
true.
Yeah. But anyway, wasn't this about a tape?
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's a clever device in the film that they don't answer it. But again, if he is here to reassure her and is skeptical and wants to show her that nothing's a thing, wouldn't they answer the phone so he could at least know for sure?
So.
I mean,
yeah, you would think so. I wondered about that, and I wondered if maybe she just left that part out. like, did he know about the phone call? I don't know. I mean, she clearly does, and she's clearly rattled when the phone rings. But it seems like he's not even aware of that element because he just says something like, "Aren't you going to answer it?"
That's true.
And she almost does. I mean, I feel like she goes towards the phone, but eventually the answering machine picks up, and so she doesn't answer, and he leaves. But, she's still scared, and he can tell that she's scared. And so he says, all right, fine, make me a copy. I'll look at it. I'll try to figure out where it came from, how it was filmed, where it was filmed. I'll see what I can do. So she does. I guess she utilizes the equipment at her work to make a copy of the tape. And as she's making it, the equipment is acting funny. There's something weird going on. Like the lights are flashing on the face of the recorder and things, and it's just acting odd.
Right. And if you've been in video production, this is what's called timecode. As the tape goes, there's a track that's laid down that basically frame by frame says this is frame 1, this is frame 2, this is frame 3, this is frame 4. And it's used by the VCR in order to go back and forth through it or to skip to different frames. I mean, my gosh, you got to explain this technology to everybody now. But it was an important element of tapes. And the control track actually gets laid down at the edge of the tape. So if you think about a tape as a physical medium being pulled through a machine, This is one of the real flaws of VHS technology, is that this timecode track is right on the edge. And so after a while, what part of the tape gets the most worn but the edges? And so the edges get, kind of like wavy, and when that timecode track is damaged, then the VCR doesn't know quite how to read those frames, and so you get spots in the video where it might flicker or go weird on you. And that's because that timecode section has been damaged. But it doesn't happen in the way that she sees it. This is total Hollywood stuff. It's not like it's going to start showing things that aren't numbers on the equipment. It flickers through all these weird symbols or something like that. And it's not going to do that. It's just, actually what's going to happen is it's going to freeze. It's going to freeze on the last number it could read. And as you advance through the tape, you're just not going to see any other numbers until maybe it picks up another one later. So yeah, it's a little bit of unnecessary, but interesting movie trivia for you.
Yeah. Well, I was curious about that because I knew you knew about that stuff, and all this stuff that we've just talked about, from the time I said that Thursday flashes on the screen to where we are now. All of this takes like 2 or 3 minutes, which I thought was really funny because then it jumps immediately to Friday, day 2. And I'm like, woo, these days are going to go by fast. And they do.
Yeah, they do.
This week goes by really fast. But on day 2, she takes the tape to Noah's apartment, and he's got all this video equipment too. And he's talking about all this techie stuff about fingerprints and about how this couldn't possibly be a copy because of the fingerprints. And like the fingerprints should be able to tell you what medium it was filmed through and all that kind of stuff. Is that stuff real, or is that Hollywood too?
Some of that's kind of BS. I mean, as far as I know, like now we have metadata, right? You take a picture and there's a little bit of information in that JPEG or whatever that tells you it was taken by this camera, it was on this date, it's this resolution, the aperture was set at this, this was the exposure, and all that information gets recorded. It's not true with VHS tapes. To my knowledge, you'd have to do a considerable amount of detective work to be able to figure out a camcorder, a Sony camcorder recorded this, And as far as like dates and things like that go, none of that was on the control track. All of that was on, like, if you wanted it, as you and I know, you had to have like the date pop up on the screen and get burned into the image somewhere. Yeah. So no, most of that was BS, but. Again, the spirit of it is there. The timecode track is weird. And actually, if you make a copy of a tape, it lays down new timecode track onto the copy. So one way that you can kind of fix, even though you degrade the tape, one way that you can try to at least help try to fix a tape and make it a little more watchable is to make a copy. Because even though you're going to get the same flaws that you had in the original tape, it's going to be with new timecode laid under it, which is fresh, which is going to say this is frame 1, this is frame 2, this is frame 3. So it's not going to freak the VCR out, and it's also not going to, if you have a fresher tape, so you're not going to degrade it much more, as quickly. So that's really the only thing there.
Well, and it's really pretty insignificant whether it's real or not, except for that it establishes that there is something odd and possibly unexplainable or supernatural about this tape.
Yeah.
And while they're looking at it, another thing that they do, and again, I remember the tracking problems on the VCR, especially on older tapes, and you would have to try to adjust the tracking to get it back on, and it very rarely worked, especially for those tapes that you watched over and over again as a kid. Eventually they would just crap out. But while they're trying to adjust the tracking to fix it, she thinks that she sees something over in the, I guess it would be in a different frame. And so they try to stretch it so that they can see what's in that other frame or something. I don't really know how it works, but they can't get it to work. But when she leaves the apartment, she takes the tape with her. He wants her to leave it so he can look at it, but she doesn't want his assistant to see it. So she takes it with her. And, as she walks out of his building, there's a big, tall ladder, almost identical to, very reminiscent of the ladder that she saw. So these images are popping up in her life. On day 3, she visits Becca, Katie's friend from the opening scene, in a mental hospital.
Becca, how did she die? Please, I need to know.
And you will. She'll show you.
Who? Who will show me?
Not now. days.
I don't know how Becca can intuit this, but it's pretty ominous, and it kind of just reaffirms for Rachel that her fears are substantiated. And then she goes and I don't know, borrows some equipment or goes and uses an equipment at some facility, and she stretches the tracking again. And not only does she see a lighthouse, which she's just barely able to, but she's able to catch a screen grab of that and print it out. But also that fly that we had seen before that had been buzzing around, and that she had made notice of before. When she pauses the tape this time, it's subtle, but she can still see the fly moving. The wings of the fly are still moving, and she reaches up as though she's going to try to pluck it off the screen, and that's exactly what she does, as though she has pulled it out of the video, out through the television, which of course becomes important later. And when that happens, she also gets a bloody nose. So there's no question throughout that there is something supernatural going on. They don't try to keep that from us. They don't try to keep us guessing if she's just being paranoid or if there really is. It's clear, it's evident throughout that there is something strange. Then seeing that lighthouse leads her to the library for more research.
Yeah, how classic is this, right? Oh, by the way, none of this, none of what we have been talking about, as I remember it, was really in the Japanese film. There wasn't pulling a fly off the screen. There might have been a little bit of them investigating with the tracking and things like that, but again, all of these supernatural things that are going on with the tape, and not things that are just kind of related to investigating the tape. Gotcha. I don't remember actually in the Japanese film, and I don't remember them also seeing images from the tape as the thing goes on. So that's part of what keeps this interesting. And you're right, this is so classic investigation. She goes to the library, she pulls down a stack of books, she pulls out a book called America's Lighthouses, an illustrated history. And it's so cute and it's quaint, but we actually used to have to do research like this, so it's not all that unusual.
I remember,
yeah. So this movie's really at that weird point in time where the internet was a thing. The internet was definitely a thing by here, but it wasn't as sophisticated and as developed as it is now, and we hadn't digitized all of the stuff, historical things yet.
That's right.
She's going through the library and she finds, sure enough, there's a photograph, interestingly enough, from the same angle, basically, so she can recognize it easily.
And not only that, but it's also on like the third page. Like she just barely opens the book and here it is. Found it.
It's the lighthouse. But anyway, it's Moesko Island is the place that it leads her to next. And she investigates Moesko Island. I think this time she goes to the internet and she pulls up some articles. And what we get here is basically some backstory of her finding about a woman named Anna Morgan, who was a breeder of horses. There was some unusual sickness that the ranch horses on this ranch at Moesko Island were getting, mysterious deaths. Nobody could understand what was happening. Then her suicide comes into play. And then as she's doing this investigation, she finds herself absently scribbling. And when she looks down, she sees that she has scribbled over the face of one of her photos. These long, it almost looks like she's adding hair to it, really, right over the face. And that mirrors and parallels what she has seen in Katie's notebook in her bedroom, that she had taken all these magazine pictures and was just doing this constant scribbling, as well as scribbling like big rings over everything. I don't remember this kind of stuff in the Japanese one either. So, really connecting this and making the supernatural influence in her, and her investigations, the people around her. I mean, we didn't even mention it, but Aiden himself is having premonitions. It's a different take on what Samara, in this case, the ghost, can do, and just how much of a connection to the real world she has.
Right. Well, all this library research leads her to that island and to this woman named Anna Morgan. And there's been something strange going on, with their horses and with Anna herself. And on day 5, Noah sees his face distorted in a security camera at a gas station. So he is on board with her. He believes her. She decides that she's going to go to this island. But at some point, she's talking to her sister, trying to arrange babysitting, and she chokes and she coughs up what appears to be some hair and maybe like a sensor, like a what are those called? They put them on your body at the hospital, like
Oh, yeah.
What are those called, Todd? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
to
I know
read like your heart rate and all those types of things.
Yeah, it's some kind of heart monitor at the end of a wire, but it sticks. It sticks to your body, like they put like 5 of them on your chest or something. Then now I think they use like suction cups, but then now, yeah, it used to be sticky. I don't know what they're called, but yeah, everybody should know what that is. And if you don't, you're an idiot.
Right. So she coughs one of those up. And then she wakes up from a nightmare, I think, and she goes into the living room, and Aiden has watched the video. And she's, of course, very upset about that. So she knows that she's got to go into action. So on day 6, she hooks up with Noah, and the plan is she's going to go to the island, and Noah is going to go to the mental hospital where Anna Morgan had been a patient, and they're going to do more investigation. Rachel does go to the island where she visits Mr. Morgan, who is still living there, apparently.
So, what is it you're writing, miss? About horses in general, or just those that go strange?
I read you had to put so many down.
Most put themselves down. They drown.
How'd they get out?
They just broke through the fences and ran to the shore.
So they went crazy.
It would seem so, yes. Or maybe they just sense things before we do.
But eventually, he figures out what she's really there asking about, and he just tells her to leave it alone. Meanwhile, before she had left, Aiden had given her this drawing, and when she leaves the Morgan's house, she opens up his drawing and sees that this was a drawing of this house. And eventually she calls Aiden, and he tells her, the little girl told me to draw it. She shows me things. She lives in a dark place now. Meanwhile, Noah is at the hospital. He finds Anna's records. He finds that she's had a history of miscarriage, and that's what's kind of led to her mental deterioration. But he also finds that at some point there was a daughter, and that the daughter had also been a patient at the hospital. So he tries to get her records, and eventually doesn't. I mean, this is all cutting back and forth. We cut back and forth between the island and the hospital, but eventually he finds out that there's video record of Samara, this daughter, and he goes to try to get it, but it's not there. Somebody else has already taken it, and the last person to check it out was the dad, Mr. Morgan. Meanwhile, back on the island, Rachel visits one of the Morgan's neighbors, and the neighbor explains that they tried to have kids over and over again, but they couldn't. So finally, one winter, they went away and they came back with a baby, and it was Samara. But soon after that, Anna, the mother, started having visions that only occurred around Samara, and things just generally started going bad around the island. Not only were the horses going crazy and dying and jumping off cliffs and things, but it's a fishing island. They couldn't get in a good haul, all kinds of things that seemed to point that there was something going on with Samara. And that things are better now that she's gone. So Rachel goes back to the Morgan house, and she finds Samara's birth certificate, which says that she is the natural daughter of these two people, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. And she also, again, very conveniently, finds the tape sticking out, the tape of Samara's hospital video. And she puts it in, and the doctor is questioning Samara.
I love my mommy.
Yes, you do. But you don't want to hurt her anymore, now do you? You don't want to hurt anyone.
But I do, and I'm sorry. It won't stop.
Well, that's why you're here. So that I can help you to make it stop.
He's going to leave me here.
Who?
Daddy.
And then that's all we get before Mr. Morgan hits her from behind, snatches away the videotape, and then just kind of really, and the TV, which is interesting. And I didn't really understand the purpose of hitting her either, because it didn't seem like he had really any malice towards her, except for that she was kind of bringing this stuff up again. But he says to her, she'll never stop. And meanwhile, he's walking into the bathroom, and there's water all over the floor. The tub is full, and he's got all of this electrical equipment. I don't know if it was plugged into a generator or what, but it's like tons of this equipment all plugged in. And he ends up electrocuting himself because he says she'll never stop. And again, conveniently, I don't have any idea how he got there in 15 minutes, but Noah shows up. Rachel remembers that Aiden had said she doesn't like the barn. Horses keep her awake. And so they go check out the barn. And again, they find the ladder. And they crawl up the ladder, and they find that in the hayloft has been set up a child's room. And presumably that it was set up there with the ladder so that the ladder could be removed and she would be stuck up there. Mm-hmm. And so Rachel comes to the conclusion that Mr. Morgan was neglectful and abusive of Samara because Samara was causing the wife's deterioration, and that's why he wanted to keep her away. And so she feels a lot of sympathy for Samara. And as they're investigating the room, they see that the wallpaper is kind of peeling, and they pull it back, and burned into the wood or etched into the wood is this tree, which she recognizes as the tree from Shelter Mountain, which then, of course, leads them back to Shelter Mountain. And then we kind of get into some of the climactic moments.
Yeah, you're right. It's really convenient. And again, it's sort of like a lighthouse. You see a tree. It could be any tree, but she somehow connects this with the tree on Shelter Mountain. I don't know. I didn't think it was that distinctive.
No.
So they go back to the cabin, and they're in the cabin, and they're like, all right, well, we're back here. She says, we've come full circle. What do we do? He gets angry. Now, why does he get angry again? Why does Noah get angry?
Because it's day 7, and she thinks it's too late. She thinks that they've run into a dead end, and he's not willing to give up. And so he starts throwing things around, like maybe it's in the maybe the clue's in the VCR, maybe it's in the TV, maybe it's in this, and he like
tearing the place apart.
And it's yeah, which is silly, but it works as a device because he throws down or knocks over this vase filled with decorative marbles, and all the marbles roll to a low spot in the floor, and they pull back the rug, and there's this big circle, and it looks mildewed. There's obviously something under there, so they get an axe, as one do, and they chop up the floor, and underneath it they find this well that we have seen. It was in the original video, and then we have a Final Destination sequence in which this Rube Goldberg device, I don't even remember exactly what happens, but there's this big stone lid on the well, and they slide it off, and they're looking down in there, and somehow like the TV stand breaks or something, and it rolls down the floor towards them, and it pushes Rachel into the well, and she falls into this huge well. Like they've already established how deep it is, but luckily she's perfectly fine.
Yeah, right. And of course, like all movie wells, at the bottom of the well, somehow it's this like gigantic cavernous room. It's not nearly as narrow as it started out at the top, apparently, because that's how you dig wells, of course. It was like a real supernatural thing. Like the TV, like water started to come from the TV. It was flickering on and off, and like nails were coming out of the floor by themselves. It was like the ghost of Samara was causing all this to happen. Again, none of this is in the original. In the original, they find the well and they investigate it. They like toss a rope down and they go down in there. So anyway, so she ends up down at the bottom of the well, and he runs off to help her. In the meantime, she is having some visions down there, and she's piecing it all together pretty quickly. Supernaturally, the top of the well is coming back over her, trying to seal her back in. And when she looks up, she sees the ring that she's been seeing this whole time.
Right.
Which is this. And again, it doesn't physically make sense. Because in order for this to happen, the lid would have to be a little smaller than the opening. But we've seen that the lid actually is much bigger than the opening. But anyway, the idea is that the sunlight kind of creeps in around the edges of the top of the well when it's sealed and makes that ring. So the ring really was supposed to refer to the cyclical nature of this video. At least that's how it originally was. In the remake, they really make a point of this physical, actual ring. People are like in Noah's visions, he's drawing a ring. She's absolutely drawing a ring. Katie was drawing a ring. But what she's able to do, and I think this was clever, is piece it together that the ring is what Samara had to stare up at for 7 days before she died. In the meantime, she looks and sees on the sides of the walls that there are scratch marks where somebody obviously been trying to claw herself out. A cheap shot, but okay, whatever, because it's supernatural. She has the vision in the well of exactly what happened. And that is that Samara was standing at that well, staring at the tree in this big field. and her mother comes up from behind her and says, "All I wanted was you," before putting a big plastic bag over her head, starting to suffocate her, and then dumping her into the well. So the mother apparently thinks that she killed her before she tossed her into the well, but the tragedy of the situation is that Samara wasn't even dead at that point. The body kind of lifts up in the well, and she embraces it, and it looks like Samara as she was. But again, it's part of her vision, and as her vision kind of fades away, she sees that she's holding the skeleton of this girl. And this is where, we've hit the traditional ghost story of, I guess the point of it is to make peace with the ghost by finding the body and then burying it properly, that kind of deal.
Right. Okay. And that's very traditional. You've seen that a lot. When a body is not laid to rest appropriately, then the spirit, haunts and whatnot. And I'm all well and good with that. And it's actually kind of a sweet moment when she lifts up, Samara in her normal childlike state is cute and innocent, and you feel sympathy for her, and you feel sympathy for Rachel because you think that she's done such a good thing here. And it appears then that it's going to be happily ever after. They kind of ride off together, and eventually they pick up Aiden, and they're all in the car together. And I think that Rachel and Aiden are holding hands. And then here's where the twist comes. Now, before we get to the twist, this bothered me the first time I saw it, and it still bothers me.
Okay.
I understand that from what Rachel has been shown, it appears that this mother maliciously killed her daughter because she was mentally unstable or mentally unill, or maybe there was something going on with this daughter that was supernatural and that was inconvenient and was causing bad things to happen. Like because Samara didn't like the horses died. And of course, that's not a good thing. That's their livelihood. And, if it's causing problems for the whole island, okay, so maybe she would have a motive to kill her. But it seems like we're supposed to sympathize with Samara at this point. However, if Samara's whole purpose was to find peace and to find aid and assistance, why would she do that by killing people? That just didn't make any sense to me. And killing innocent people. I mean, it reminds me, I don't want to, in case we ever watch this movie or in case you haven't seen it, it reminds me of that Kevin Bacon movie, Stir of Echoes, where there's a very similar thing going on. And once the spirit is, satisfied, once the spirit is laid to rest, then everything is okay. But even in that movie, though there were hauntings and there were strange things going on, the spirit didn't seem to be malicious. So I was curious as to why Rachel would just disregard all of that had happened. The fact that all these people had died, including her niece. I mean, it ends up making sense with the twist. Why don't you go ahead and explain the twist?
She's laying her son to rest, and she's like, it's all over now because we found Samara and we put her to rest, whatever. And he bolts up out of bed and says, "You helped her?" And she's like, "Well, yeah." And he says, "You weren't supposed to do that. She never sleeps." And then we cut to Noah. And Noah, remember, he watched the tape, the next day. So this would be the next day, and Noah's back in his studio. And I'm not going to walk us through the whole thing, but suffice it to say that there is a very creepy and I think extremely effective scene where the tape comes on, and basically what happened to Katie happens to Noah, except we get to more or less see it. This was great, and I think what's kind of creepy about the Japanese film is that we don't get a ton of the backstory. We don't get a ton of the explanation. There aren't these premonitions, so there's not a kid to say, "Oh, you weren't supposed to do that." We just discover to our horror that is still not going to stop this from happening. So yeah, that's kind of what happens. Rachel runs there, realizing that Noah's in danger, tries to call him. He's not answering. When she gets there, she discovers him in the chair. So she runs home, and she grabs the tape, and she's just smashing against the floor like, "What's wrong? What do you need from me? What do you want from me?" And she destroys the tape in the process and tosses it into the fireplace. And then pretty much conveniently, I think, because she comes up with these ideas that are pretty spot on pretty quickly, she realizes what was different about her is that she made a copy of the tape.
Right.
I don't know if a person would ever figure that out, but
yeah, I don't know either. I mean, and again, that's one of those things she does. I mean, she figures things out pretty quickly. I mean, we can give her credit for being smart or whatever, but yeah, she thinks, why, she says out loud, "Why not me? Why him? Why not me?" So she thinks, what was different? And so she sees the copy under the couch and she thinks, that's what's different. I made a copy. He didn't. So her theory is that if she helps or if she has Aiden make a copy, that then he will be safe. And so that's exactly what she does. It's kind of a neat shot where she's guiding his hand on the machine as they're sitting there doing this. She says something like, it's going to be okay now. And Aiden says, well, what about the person we show it to? What happens to them? And we see a look on her face and she doesn't really respond. And then it just cuts to black. And that's the end. I like it. I don't know, talking about it now, I like it even more because, we've now talked for over an hour about the plot and there's a lot going on. And it is fast paced and I never lost interest. I was never bored. In fact, I really feel like I could probably go back and watch this again and catch things that I hadn't caught before. I think that it's probably a movie that deserves at least a couple watches, a couple viewings, because there really is a lot going on. Is it really believable that all of these puzzle pieces would fall into place so conveniently? Certainly not. But at the same time, it's well constructed enough so that it doesn't seem like such a leap of faith to believe these things, that it didn't pull me out. I was okay with it.
I'm the same way. At times it can feel, honestly, the investigation sequence reminded me a little bit of a giallo film. We've seen a couple of those, and what we talk about in those is that how oftentimes the investigation doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. They just conveniently stumble across things, or they just have some vision, and so it leads them to some house somewhere. It all ends up pretty random in those kind of movies. This movie, there are a couple moments where it seems a little too convenient, but at least it makes sense. It's not super random.
Yeah, right.
It was totally fine. And again, that's what makes this movie, I think, better than at least the one Japanese movie that came before it, in that, I'm telling you, with Ringu, you watch it, it creeps you out, and then you're treated to another hour of investigation where really nothing spooky or supernatural happens. Mm-hmm. And then you get that, the thing at the end. So it's really more of a detective story, bookended by a ghost story in that sense. In this case, it feels more like a ghost story throughout. But you're right. I guess what we're supposed to understand is that Samara herself, even as a girl, is just plain evil, or at least...
evil. Right.
Yeah, right? Or at least can't help that she's evil in some way, shape, or form. She doesn't need any kind of resolution. She is just going to continue to visit upon other people the pain that she experienced.
Right.
That's that. And that's a real nihilistic, kind of thing. And I think that's what makes this movie so creepy, is it's terribly nihilistic. And again, that's what you're going to find in J-horror and Korean horror and stuff like that, is things are just generally really bleak and nihilistic in their traditions of horror films.
Yeah, I wanted just to say that visually, I really appreciate this movie. There's some really good images. You kind of, that last scary climactic scene with Samara climbing out of the television. Again, that's another one of the iconic scenes. And that specifically was a scene that I wish that I had not seen before I saw the movie. It was in almost every trailer. It's the most exciting part of the movie. And it was just kind of spoiled, in the marketing. And that was a little bit disappointing. But there's some other, the cinematography throughout I think is good, but there are some really striking images. The one that stands out to me is in the flashback scene where we see Samara from the back standing in front of her well. And in the background are these rolling hills and that tree with the red leaves, and there are horses, kind of grazing, and it's just a beautiful picture. And there's some really interesting images like that I really appreciated from a technical perspective. You're the tech guy. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, that was beautiful. The great cinematography in here. The director is Gore Verbinski, and he does really good stuff. Was it maybe a couple years after this that he did the Pirates of the Caribbean film, the first one?
Yeah.
So he really switched gears here. I've always kind of liked what Gore Verbinski does. A little bit of the horse stuff was kind of silly, though. I thought it was funny, that ferry scene when she's going over to the island, and she's staring out into space, and she walks back absently and comes across that horse in the horse pen, and she reaches in, and the horse kind of veers up at her, and she's like, oh, don't worry, just, it's okay, I'm not going to hurt you, and she reaches her hand back in again, and it's clearly antagonizing this horse, and he rears up,
right,
and she's just standing there like, no, it's okay, like what? Just walk away.
Right, exactly.
Stop annoying this horse.
I glossed over that scene. I forgot. I actually really liked that scene. It was exciting when the horse breaks out and is running all around the ferry, and it eventually jumps off. It was kind of hard to watch. We've talked about this before. It's difficult for me to watch animals in peril and animals suffering, but it was a dramatic scene. It was exciting, and there are some, cut in here into these investigation scenes. There are some exciting and suspenseful scenes. I like the movie. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I liked it better this time around than I remembered liking it the first time. So I think maybe I just kind of needed to be away from it for a while and return to it with fresh eyes.
I liked it too, and I know you're trying to wind us down, but there's one thing I want to bring up, and that is this tape. Mm-hmm. Okay, as beautiful as the tape is, and as cool as the imagery is, and how it all kind of makes sense with the story as she progresses, what I don't understand is this tape is very specific to her and her experience. It turns out to be. So
right.
When other people watch the tape, are they going to see different things, or is it for everybody? It always going to play out this way. You know what I mean? Or do they just not do the investigation, and so they don't get to see the ladder and the water, of the dead horse and the tree on the hill or whatnot?
Yeah, I don't know, and that's something that I don't remember from the sequel, and I don't know, like you said, I think there's like 16 different iterations of this. I don't know if the tape remains the same throughout. I can't imagine that it would. I would think that would get really stale and boring really soon. So there's got to be more to the mythology of this. I just can't imagine it sustaining for as long as it has. And maybe, like I said, I don't remember the sequel, and maybe with Rings, the one that's in theater now, maybe we'll get some more mythology. I know that that one of the Japanese sequels was actually a prequel. I think it was called Ringu 0 or something like that. And it tells a lot more of Samara's backstory and actually makes her more of a sympathetic character, which on paper doesn't sound really good to me, but I'd be really interested to see what they do with it. I'm not going to race out and seek it out right away, but it would be interesting to kind of see. I would, with so many different iterations, I would be interested just to even read up more about the universe and the mythology that goes along with it.
Yeah, it would be interesting because, like, for example, in the original one, like the mother, they don't breed horses. She's like a traveling, like showman, like a traveling psychic kind of person. Back into the turn of the century, and it puts it back much earlier than like 1978, I think, which is when all the events of this happens. She's a little more old, and so they don't get to see her husband or whatever. There's none of that.
Gotcha.
When their investigation, they come across old films of this couple doing this traveling. It's essentially like a traveling sideshow where she would get objects from people in the audience and then be able to tell them about themselves, or she would, do like a psychic presentation basically. And then this was their daughter. So the parents themselves, in the original novel and in the original Japanese film are also I don't know if they are legitimately psychic, or not, but there's clearly some implication because their daughter, therefore, has these powers.
Gotcha.
So it would have to be totally different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah, I want to see the new one because with the advancements in technology, I think there's all kinds of cool things that they could do. I mean, my God, surely somebody would put this on YouTube, right? I mean, that would be an easy way to get it off your back.
And now the whole world is doomed. It's so funny how much of this we've got to explain to a modern audience, right? All of these little things. Well, thank you for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend, but don't make a copy of it. Just tell them where it is. You can find the copies that we upload anyway on iTunes. We're also on Google Play and on Stitcher. Also, you can find us on Facebook. Thank you again, Jordan, for your recommendation. We will take more recommendations, and we will, of course, watch the movies you want us to see, because it's a lot more fun that way than us just twiddling our thumbs. Yep. All right, until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With two guys and a chainsaw.